everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Njabu, for those who don't know, and this is the fifth and final episode in my testimony series that I'm calling The Wilderness Years. I apologize for taking so long to record episode 5. There has been a lot of warfare around me completing this series. I think that episode 1 was the only one that I was able to just record once and put out, pretty seamlessly and smoothly every episode. Since then, I've had to record multiple times just because of different things going wrong, random things going wrong, and that kind of thing. Thankfully, I've already been through this kind of process where you're starting something new, and I guess I'm familiar with some of the warfare that comes in the beginning, but I definitely got to a point with this series where I was just ready to throw in the towel, and I was just like, you know what, I think I'm just going to leave it alone, and I don't think I will actually record the last episode. They'll just have to live with the cliffhanger, because I'm done trying to finish the series with everything that keeps coming up against me. And then I hopped on actually a prayer and prophecy call through my apostles ministry, and one of her ministers, who doesn't know me personally, doesn't know anything about what I do in my spare time or whatever, she received a word of encouragement for me, and she was just like, Njabu, the Lord says don't grow weary in while doing, and she just encouraged me to just keep on going. And so I was like, okay, the Lord's encouraging me to press on. Let me come back and try and record this a third time, and hopefully this will be the final time and I can wrap this thing up. So I'll give you a quick recap just in terms of some of the things that happened in prior episodes, just to get us all back on the same page. And so previously, you had seen me move to Houston, and when I got to Houston, Texas, I discovered that the Lord would not allow me to settle down. Instead, I was called to basically move from place to place, and I ended up bouncing from one Airbnb to another with no home base in sight for close to a year. And then just like that, I received the instruction to return to California. When I realized it was time for me to move back to California, I had around $230 in my bank account, and I needed to basically just leave by faith, despite the fact that it was such a long way, and trust that the Lord would make sure that my trip was successful. I was also further encouraged to just take that leap of faith, because the Lord was letting me know that He would provide for me. And so all of that just gave me enough confidence to make that trip back and take what felt like a risk at the time, right? But by the time that I got back to California, I of course had spent a lot of that money. I had just enough money left in my account for a single night in an Airbnb. So I checked myself in and I went to sleep, hoping and praying and believing that I would wake up the next day to some kind of, massive financial miracle that would make this part of my process make some kind of sense. I went to sleep, I woke up, and there was no miracle in sight, okay? So California is where things definitely starts to shift for me, and this is the part where I would say my process does take its darkest turn. But at the same time, I want to make clear that even though this is the worst part of my wilderness season, this is also the final stage, even though I didn't know that at the time. But this is the part where the wilderness season is wrapping up for me, and I do want to make that clear in advance, because I think that it's easier to hear a hard story or a story that doesn't seem like it makes any sense when you know that that chapter does have a happy ending and things do work out right in the end, okay? So I'm back in California. I wake up the next day and I have no more money left to stay in Airbnbs full time, okay? And at the same time, California is also, for those who are outside the US who don't know, California is also one of the most expensive parts of the US. So things like DoorDash, Uber Eats, that kind of gig work, it does pay more in California than it does in many other parts of the US, and that's kind of a silver lining. But at the same time, housing in California also does cost sometimes 2 to 3 times as much as it does cost in Texas and other parts of the US as well, right? So it's almost like, there's no, the math just wasn't mathing. And so I definitely felt like the odds were stacked against me. And that was one of the real major fears that I had in terms of just going back to California, is that I felt like, okay, if I'm barely making it in a state that has a reasonable cost of living, how am I going to survive in a state that has the highest cost of living? Like, it didn't make sense to me, right? And so I definitely had those concerns, but the Lord was gracious to me in the sense that He confirmed to me that I truly was where He called me to be. He made it clear that I didn't move back in error, right? I hadn't made it all up in my own mind. He even let me know which part of the Los Angeles County area he wanted me to go. He made it very clear that I was to stay reasonably close to a city called Long Beach. Long Beach is about 45 minutes outside of LA. So it's not in LA, the city, it's more so LA County. So the Lord basically made it clear that I was to stay kind of reasonably close to Long Beach and the surrounding cities, okay? Meaning that I could do my food delivery wherever, but every time that I had enough money for an Airbnb, I needed to do my best to book an Airbnb in that general area and treat it like a home base. In the end, my obedience to that specific instruction to treat that area like a home base is what would ultimately open the door for me to get back into stable housing, okay? But I obviously didn't know that at the time. It was just an instruction that I received and that I had to obey. Okay, so here I am back in California, and things obviously aren't like they were in Texas. I no longer have the finances to stay in Airbnbs full time, meaning that I have to essentially lower my expectations. Now, thankfully, California does have minimum wage for people who do gig work and delivery work, that kind of thing, which Texas doesn't have. California also has, I would say, a more robust tipping culture than Texas does, right? And so those things added up to me being able to actually make some kind of a living doing gig work in a way that I absolutely was not able to while I was still in Houston. So once I crossed over and I got to the area that the Lord had called me to, I started to make $500 to $600 a week doing food delivery, whereas in Houston I could barely even make like $35, right? Like I couldn't even make $25 sometimes in a day, right? It was just so completely dry. So that did make me feel a little bit encouraged. Also, something else that happened was that somehow when I moved back to California, I was able to open a new Uber Eats account, which you're not typically supposed to be able to do. I think typically if they deactivate your account, you're not supposed to be able to register again and just, start doing food delivery again. But somehow I was able to open a new account so that I had both Uber and DoorDash that I was doing. So I felt like even that was also the Lord's favor. So yes, I found myself in a situation where I was doing Uber Eats and DoorDash and making like $600 a week, but that's not enough to get you housing in California, especially not when you have bad credit and debt on top of that, right? And at the same time, that 600 a week isn't even enough for you to get a decent Airbnb for more than 3 or 4 days at a time either. So what that translated to is that I no longer was making enough money to be sheltered full time. So my new routine was that I would spend 3 or 4 days in an Airbnb each week, and then I would spend anything from 3 to 4 nights a week in my car. So I might stay in an Airbnb on Monday night until Thursday or Friday morning. And then Friday through Monday, I would be basically doing deliveries all day. And then at night, I would sleep in an empty parking lot. And I would almost always do deliveries in the same area because, again, the Lord made it clear that I was to try and stay in a particular pocket, in a particular area within Los Angeles County. So once I found a safe and secluded parking lot that was in the right area, I would then always stay there. Now, this might be hard to understand, but even finding that parking lot, that in and of itself was actually a major relief and a major burden off of my shoulders. I was very grateful for that parking lot when I found it because it took me actually a lot of trial and error to even get that kind of space that I could depend on. I vividly remember the first night when I officially made that transition to, okay, I am now somebody who sleeps in my car frequently, right? The first night when I made that transition where I was like, okay, this is apparently my life now, and so I need to find myself a good space. It took me hours to find a space that was safe and that was somewhere where I wouldn't be bothered by other people. There is so much homelessness in California, and in many areas you don't see it during the day because these are places of business. So even in terms of the industrial parts of town where there's more so like people doing manufacturing and that kind of thing, like that kind of hands-on labor where it's not even a lot of traffic in those areas because the only people who go there are the people who work there, right? Even in those kinds of areas where they're borderline deserted during the day, you circle back come nighttime and you find that they're actually hotspots for people to park and sleep in overnight. So there are many areas where during the day you'll be driving through it and thinking, hey, this might be a good spot, for me to return to come nighttime. And then you circle back at night and you're driving through and you just see a bunch of cars with blacked out windows parked outside these different places of business. And the fog on those windows and just the fact that they're always blacked out and the fog on the windows, that always lets you know that somebody's sleeping there. And sometimes it's like multiple cars at a time. And to me, that registered that, okay, it's taken. I'm not trying to come back here myself, okay? And in a lot of these places as well, well, where it's more so like homeless, I would say encampments, maybe, where there's multiple people who use those spaces at night. You'll see people riding around on bikes, and, sometimes they're minding their own business, but sometimes it does look like, nefarious activity is going on. It looks like things are being sold. You know what I'm saying? So that's definitely a bad issue. It's definitely a major problem just in California in general. So much so that a lot of businesses, even in these very quiet parts of town, they do hire overnight security whose whole job is to just basically stay up all night and, keep their eyes peeled so that they can kick out anybody who drives onto, the property, drives into the parking lot, hoping to park their car and sleep, right? That's their whole job, is to watch out for people like me. So that first night, I was running into all of these issues as I looked for a place to stay. Each spot, one after the other, something would happen that would make me uncomfortable. Something frightening would happen, or one of the bike boys would drive by and just kind of make me feel uncomfortable and all of that. And I would just think, fine, okay, let me try somewhere else. And then I get to somewhere else, and just as I'm starting to settle down and fall asleep, I hear a knock on my window, and it's a security guard saying, "Ma'am, you've got to go," right? So place after place after place, I keep getting sent away. So that went on for hours and hours and hours. That first night, I think I tried 6 different spots, and then I eventually stumbled upon the seventh one, which was an answered prayer. There were no other cars there. There was no security. It was well lit, but at the same time, parts of the parking lot were dark enough where I could kind of pull my car back and it wouldn't arouse too much suspicion. There was a main road that business was facing. The parking lot next to the business was definitely directly facing a main road that was pretty busy, but I could park my car in a way where if somebody wasn't paying too much attention, they would basically just feel like, that's probably somebody who works at that place who's just for some reason working overnight, well, at least that's what I told myself. Okay, I told myself that it doesn't seem too suspicious for my car to be here even at 2 o'clock in the morning. Who knows, right? But there were a couple of downsides in terms of that parking lot. It did belong to a business that kept pretty early hours, so that business, its hours started at like 6 a.m. in the morning. And so there were some early birds too that worked for that company who would sometimes show up as early as like 5:30. Okay. And so what that meant for me is that my day also had to begin very, very quickly, because I always had to make sure that I left before somebody could drive up and find me. That did happen a couple times, where somebody who worked for that business showed up early and they found me, and it was definitely very scary. So I basically just had to ensure that I ran my life in a way that would allow me to keep the right hours, to make sure that I would never be found and I wouldn't be seen. So my new routine was that I might finish doing deliveries at like 8 p.m. and then I would head over to the parking lot and get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, because obviously it's hard to sleep in a car. That parking lot was also very, very close to a train track, so there were always train noises all through the night. That also made it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. Another thing that made it hard to sleep as well was just the fact that the car that I had at the time was a two-seater. It didn't have a back seat, so there was really no way for me to stretch out. Even just in terms of the 2 front seats that I had, they only reclined back like maybe 30 degrees, because if you try to recline further than that, there's like a compartment blocking you, right? And so really you could never fully recline or even halfway recline the seats. So it was just never very comfortable. It just basically translated to me always having to sleep in a seated position. I would sleep in a seated position and I would roll up a sweater and put it by the side of my face, and then I would lean against the window of my car, and that would be my pillow basically. And so all of those factors are the reason why I would typically only get 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night, and why the sleep would always be broken. I would basically sleep in intervals over the course of the night and just not able to really fall into like a deep and consistent sleep for the most part. And then around 4:45 in the morning, I needed to be up and start getting ready to go. I would brush my teeth with a bottle of water. I would wash my hands with a bottle of water to make sure I was out of that place by 5:20 or 5:30 a.m. And then I would literally just be out all day doing deliveries. And then come nighttime, I would get back to the parking lot, get a few hours of broken sleep, and repeat that process again. So I was basically pulling like 16-hour days, right? But once I'd gone through that routine for like 3 days or 3.5 days, without fail, I would have enough money at the end of that period to check into an Airbnb and to stay in an Airbnb for the next few days, basically resting and recovering. So that was basically the routine that I repeated week after week, and it was definitely grueling. Like life felt very unbelievable, and I spent a lot of that period honestly in a daze. psychologically. Like, I spent much of that period not really there, I definitely feel like during that time I was one of those people who, if you looked in their eyes, you would have felt like nobody's home. I was very much kind of in a daze and in pure survival mode during this time, but this is what I had to do. And it did help for me that I always had something to look forward to week after week. It helped to know that yes, I've got 3 days ahead of me of pure hell, and it's grueling and it takes a toll on me, but after that I'll be able to check into a place somewhere and I'll get some sleep and I'll get a soft bed and I can just relax, right? It helped me week after week to know that I had something that was keeping me going. And I think that even that in and of itself was the mercy of God, right? A lot of the time I would look at people who didn't have cars to sleep in and I would think, oh my gosh, that for me, it was very jarring because, it's one thing to have compassion for people. I'm not one of those people who, I've never been one of those people who doesn't see homeless people or who doesn't have compassion for homeless people. I've always, I felt that way. And it's definitely something that's always pierced my heart. And I do believe in giving to people who are unhoused for sure, right? So I was never blind to that level of suffering before this part of my life. But I do think that it hit different in this situation because it's one thing to feel sorry for somebody when you have never experienced anything like what they're going through. It's one thing to feel compassion for someone from a distance. But when you see somebody who is basically in the same situation as you, except just slightly worse off, that shakes you in a different way. Like, I would look at people and I would think, oh my gosh, the only difference between me and you is the fact that I have this car. If this car was taken away, I would be in a really, really hellish situation. And so my heart broke for them, I think, in a different way. And I definitely, even in the midst of the 3.5 months that I spent homeless or unhoused, even in that time, I definitely was very, very acutely aware of the fact that even though I was at my own rock bottom, I still had a level of privilege that many other people don't have. So I'm going through this routine, and of course, it starts to take a toll on me physically. By the time that the time came for me to check into an Airbnb each week, my body would be tapped out. Like, I started to develop a repetitive stress injury in my right foot where I consistently got plantar fasciitis that almost never really went away, right? Because you're walking so much during the day. I think people who don't do food delivery think that all you do is to just hop in and out of your car and drive around, but you don't. You actually log thousands of steps a day because you're going into different buildings and some of them are huge and people don't give you the instructions for how to find their apartment, so you're getting lost. A lot of the time you might not even be able to park close to the person's home or the person's apartment where you're delivering the food, so you have to park down the street and then walk. There is a lot of walking that's happening. So you're doing all of this work for very long shifts day after day on very little sleep. And then at nighttime for me as well, I never really fully got to recover because of course, when it's time to go to the parking lot, I'll be sleeping in a seated position. So my feet were basically never off the ground, right? There was always some kind of weight and some kind of pressure on my feet. And so that is how I developed like a stress injury in my right foot. And there were times when by the time it was time to check into an Airbnb, I would be limping. I would be limping into the Airbnb because like my foot was just like, it was done. So yeah, it was just a very unreal time in my life. And basically this is the routine that I maintained for about 3.5 months. I ended up homeless in total for just under 4 months. And I do want to mention that during this time, I am not on YouTube anymore. I'm not releasing any words anymore. I'm also not even dreaming anymore, okay? I had almost stopped dreaming entirely during that time, and that was something that definitely took me by surprise, right? I was like, wow, because I'd been through things in the wilderness season, but never to the point where I stopped dreaming. The fact that I was barely dreaming anymore, it alarmed me, but it felt like there was nothing that I could really do about it. I was still praying during this time, but a lot of the prayers were very much bare minimum prayers, right? Because mentally, I just wasn't well. I was definitely in a completely backslidden state, just in terms of my mind, especially, right? Because a lot of the time when we think about being backslidden, we think about it in terms of, certain behaviors, right? But it's also very possible to be backslidden just in terms of your mentality, where you have come to a point where you just don't care about anything anymore, where the things that used to have meaning, have value for you, are things that you now no longer even really think about, no longer even entertain. If you had come to me during this part of my life trying to have a conversation about the wilderness season, it would have been like, what wilderness? Like, what wilderness season? What do you mean a process? Like, what are you talking about? I was definitely in a place mentally where I just didn't care anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just didn't care about a lot of things the way that I did before. You understand me? I was more so just trying to survive and looking at what was right in front of me day by day, moment by moment. So when it came time to pray, the prayers that I was praying were, Lord, thank you for keeping me safe on these roads. Lord, thank you for keeping me safe in this parking lot. I would pray 2 or 3 sentences and I literally couldn't even think of anything else to say. After that, I felt like I had said everything that I had to say and there was nothing left in me. You understand me? But even through all of that, I can't ever sit here and act like the Lord abandoned me during this season because, like I say, there are always small mercies and sometimes even big ones, you know. And I think that it's important to be honest in terms of how we reflect on the hard moments of our lives. I don't think it's fair and I don't think it's morally appropriate to act like any period of your life was just 1,000% darkness, darkness from start to finish, darkness from morning till night. You know, that wasn't the case for me. There were absolutely moments of reprieve, moments of relief. There were never moments of joy, but there were definitely moments of relief. When Christmas of 2024 rolled around, I was still, unfortunately, in a parking lot, and yet I was actually happy that day because I had just checked out of an Airbnb that morning, and so I felt very rested and I felt very refreshed. At the same time, the fact that it was Christmas Day meant that I would be able to go to my parking lot and just relax there all day and not worry about anybody showing up and bothering me because obviously it was an official holiday. And because a lot of people stay home with their families around that time, that also meant that the streets were empty. So everything was just peaceful and quiet. There weren't even a lot of cars driving past the parking lot making noise. You know, I just felt like I was able to just relax and be in my own world. So that morning when I had checked out of the Airbnb, I remember I stopped at like a CVS and I got some snacks and I drove to my parking lot and I just stay there all day watching videos on my phone, and I really felt like I had a good Christmas because I had peace, you know? So there were definitely moments like that, moments of mercy and moments of grace. But at the same time, I also can't just sit here and act like it was an easy time for me either because it just wasn't. You know, a lot of the time I did find myself wondering why all of this had happened. And I think that I felt tricked. And that is probably part of the reason why I wasn't praying like I used to. Because from my perspective, I am called to leave my job, which is the thing that kickstarts this whole process, right? I'm told to leave my job and I'm not told that it's going to turn my life upside down. I'm then told to go to Houston and not told what awaits for me when I get there, right? And then I'm sent back to California, and again, the Lord allows me to have hope that things are going to be different and does not reveal to me what is on the other side of that obedience, right? So there's this part of me at this time of my life that really resents the fact that God had repeatedly given me strategic bits of information in order to get my yes, but never given me the whole picture. I have been in this years long process of obeying these huge instructions just to walk into a new thing that is a fresh kind of hell, okay? So I felt tricked and I definitely felt cheated. I really felt cheated because I knew in my soul that if God had showed me everything that this process would cost me at the very beginning, I would have declined. I would have opted out, okay? So it made me feel like I didn't get to make an informed decision, knowing all of the facts before I came into agreement. And that is the thing that was creating a lot of emotional turmoil for me. That was the thing that bothered me the most emotionally, was that I felt like I was at a point where this doesn't feel ethical anymore. It doesn't feel ethical anymore. And so that was something that was really bothering me inside. But even that is something that the Lord makes right in the end. Even that is something that the Lord resolves as my story wraps up. But that is something that I will talk more about later. In terms of where I am in this part of my process, I, on one hand, feel like, okay, why would the Lord allow this to happen? But on the other hand, there is a part of me that is starting to wonder if all of this happened because of something that I had actually done. There's a part of me that's starting to question, wait a minute, did I bring all of this suffering upon myself? Did I fall into error somewhere along the way? Did I do something that has made the Lord upset with me, that my life would decline to this point, right? right? But there was always like an inner voice inside of me that said no. There was always an inner knowing that no, 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 that's not it. That's not what this is. This is happening for a reason. There has to be something, right? It's gotten so bad because what's on the other side of this is so good that it has to cost you something. It has to cost you everything. And that's why you're here. No matter how bad it got, there was a small part of me that suspected that I wasn't going through this for nothing, even though I was barely hearing the Lord anymore at this point, even though I was barely dreaming anymore at this point. There was something inside of me that was saying to me that even this is part of your process. Even this is something that He is going to use for my good. Even this has meaning. You understand me? There is an author that I used to really love. I don't really read him anymore, but I used to really love this author back in the day. And there was something that he said in a speech that was so powerful, where he said, the promises appear in retrospect. The promises appear in retrospect, meaning that it's when you look back after the storm that you see that your process and that your journey was actually full of these different experiences and nuggets and signs that were always pointing to the fact that things would work out right in the end, right? Your process was full of these little nuggets that showed that you were always going to have the victory. It's just that you didn't understand it. You didn't notice, you didn't perceive these signs and confirmations while you were in it because you were so focused on surviving and you were so blinded by your own pain. But the evidence that you would ultimately succeed, it was there all along. Even for me, when I look back on my process, I see that there were some promises, there were some indications of a coming victory that I didn't perceive at the time. I remember one time before I even left Texas, where the Lord actually led me to release one last prophetic word before I hit the road. And now around this time, the people who were watching my channel, some of them had become concerned about me and, my well-being. They were kind of wondering what's going on because they'd seen my post that I'd made where I needed the temporary housing because the hurricane was coming. They'd also seen that I was just not uploading videos the way that I used to, right? And so there had been even comments, saying, where are you? Are you okay? Let us know, right? So there was kind of an air of concern among some people because of these different things. And so because of that, I felt like, okay, I can't just get on camera and release a word and be like, okay, goodbye. I do need to say something to kind of reassure people that I'm okay. I do kind of need to address some of the other things that are going on, but I don't know how much I can say. I don't know how much I can share. So these are kind of the things that I'm concerned about as I'm going into, the process of sitting down and recording the word. But I sat down and I recorded the word, and I just remembered that as I was wrapping up the word in my mind, I was asking God, like, okay, I'm about to wrap this video up. What do I say, right? Like, how much do I really explain? What do I really share, to reassure people? How much can I share about my own situation, And all the Holy Spirit led me to say was that they shouldn't look at what I'm going through and feel afraid to say yes to God out of fear that they will be called to go through the same thing. Because we all have a different process that is going to cost us different things. That is all that I felt led to say. But even then, with that very little that I was led to say, even then, I knew in my heart that what the Holy Spirit was saying is, don't let my process scare you, because most of you are not called to the same thing. It is the calling that determines the price that you are going to have to pay, right? So even way back then, God was trying to affirm me, right? In these very subtle ways, He was giving me these small insights into the fact that the pain that I had suffered and the pain that I was yet to suffer wasn't about me and my personal failures. It wasn't about something that I had personally done. It was about something that was bigger than me, something that I was just merely a part of, okay? Another thing that I see now that I didn't see back then is that the Lord was also repeatedly talking about a coming glory. Even before I left Texas, even before I ended up in my car, the Lord was talking about the coming glory, a glory that was to come. The present suffering is nothing compared to the coming glory, right? That is Romans 8. So He was always raising this idea about the fact that a glory was coming that would be worth the pain, okay? So these are the kinds of things that had been implanted into my soul even back then. When I tell you there was a time in Texas where I fell asleep and I had a dream, and the Lord put that Romans 8 scripture in front of me about the glory that was to come. The present sufferings don't compare. I got that dream very early into my time in Texas, but I didn't understand the totality of what it meant, right? So even way back in the beginning of things getting bad, the Lord was gesturing to me, letting me know in advance. So these are the kinds of things that had been imprinted into my heart, imprinted into my spirit, even way back then, that allowed me to have this tiny sliver of hope, this tiny sense and inclination that everything that had happened since then was not for nothing, no matter how bad it got. That was always a feeling that I had in my heart underneath it all. And then one day, the Lord confirmed to me that the feeling was indeed true. It was a random night where I was, of course, in California, sitting in my parking lot, and I was watching a video on my phone. The video that I was watching was actually from my apostle, who is still my apostle now. Now, my apostle, she's obviously an apostle, but she also has a very strong prophetic gifting. So she has a YouTube channel and she releases words on YouTube on top of all the other ministry stuff that she does. So I was sitting in my car and I saw that she had released a new video, and the title of the video was something about paying the full price. And I said, oh, okay, sounds like it could be interesting. Clicked on the video and that video shook up my life, okay? And so I click play and my apostle starts to talk about paying the full price. She says that there are people who are trying to pay less than the price that is required of them from the Lord in order to receive the thing that he has for them. She said you have to pay the full price for the coming glory. Don't try and pay a part. Don't try and pay half. You have to surrender yourself, even though you're suffering, even though you're in pain. You have to pay the full price for the coming glory. And when I tell you, I almost passed out. And one thing to know, when people are speaking, sometimes it's not even just the words themselves. It's not like the words themselves are necessarily life-changing or incredibly poetic or something like that. That's not what people are responding to. What you're responding to is the spirit behind the words. What you're responding to is the power of the Lord that is released as this person is speaking the words that they have been called to speak to you, right? That is what moves people when it comes to prophecy, okay? So somebody else might be listening to the message and not be moved, not be shaken, not be stirred. But when I tell you that in my car, I felt the wave of the Holy Ghost come upon me to the point that it makes me emotional. Even when I remember this event, I felt the wave of the Holy Ghost coming upon me to the point that I was starting to lose consciousness. And just before I fell out, I said, Lord, don't knock me out, which is what I say every single time that I feel something like that, because I do not like to faint. I've fainted before and it was traumatic for me. So the Lord knows me. He knows every time as I'm starting to feel overcome by the Holy Ghost, the last thing that I say is, Lord, please. And then he brings me right back, And so that's what happened. I just felt the wave. And I just I knew that this word was for me, okay? It confirmed everything that I had been feeling. It gave language to everything that I had been feeling deep inside of me that had been telling me that the pain that I had gone through would not be wasted. It confirmed to me that what I was going through wasn't because God was upset with me. It wasn't because the Lord had abandoned me. It wasn't about anything that I'd done or that I didn't do. Yes, I'm an imperfect person. Everybody is. But that in and of itself was not what brought my life down to nothing, okay? It was about putting something on the altar. It was a sacrifice that I had to make in order to receive what God had for me. I had to pay the full price for the coming glory. And I want you to hear that by the Spirit, okay? In the new covenant that we are part of through Christ, we don't sacrifice with blood on an altar, right? We are the altar. And what we sacrifice is our desire to do things our own way. What we sacrifice is our vision that we had of how our life would play out. That is what we put on the altar as the sacrifice to the Lord. And that sacrifice will open certain doors for you, because sacrifice is a form of worship, and worship enables breakthrough. Sacrifice, especially when you are sacrificing in obedience to an instruction that the Lord gave you, the Lord receives that as worship. The pain that you endure as you walk out the instruction that the Lord gave you, no matter the resistance, no matter the odds, no matter the challenges that come up along the way, the sacrifice of laying down your will and doing something that you would have never chosen to do of your own accord, the Lord receives that. He sees the pain and he receives sees that as worship. It registers to him as worship, and it empowers something for you on the back end, okay? So there are things that my process positioned me to walk into, things that it prepared me for, things that I never could have earned in 100 lifetimes if I had tried to do them in my own strength or tried to do them the world's way. There are things that I would have been unqualified to receive if I had not been developed in a dark place. And that is exactly what the Lord told me when this wilderness season came to an end. I think I was actually in the middle of worship when the Lord said, developed in a dark place. And that is what he was saying concerning me. It is the dark place that made me. It is the dark place that shaped me, okay? And that wasn't all that the Lord told me concerning my process. As my process wrapped up, I started to, it's like the floodgates were opened, and I started to receive really more and more understanding and revelation concerning what it all meant and what it was all for. There was one time when I received a word from the Lord through my apostles' ministry that literally made somebody's mouth drop open. Like literally out of the corner of my eye, when the word was released to me, I saw somebody's mouth drop open concerning that word. Can you imagine? Can you imagine coming from a parking lot? Coming from a parking lot to the Lord saying something to you that shocks somebody who doesn't even know you. Can you imagine? So these are the kinds of things that I'm hearing as my season comes to an end. I'm hearing things about myself that surprise me. I'm hearing things about myself that surprise other people. And bit by bit, God is starting to reveal to me how big it really is, okay? But that's not even something that I want to get too far deep into in terms of sharing details, because ultimately I'm not called here to tell people everything that the Lord has said to me concerning myself. What I'm called to do is to share my own journey and my own process in order to help you through yours, okay? So something that I really want to touch on is how this wilderness season came to an end. On that night, when I was in the parking lot, when I got that word about paying the full price, something inside of me did shift, right? It did shift because I was able to finally get that confidence that there truly was a light at the end of the tunnel. So I believe that from that point onward, it did make my process slightly easier just from an emotional perspective because I had more hope. I continued to stay close to the area that the Lord had led me to. Again, I didn't initially know why. I thought that maybe there was a job or something coming down the pipeline that would require me to be in that area. But I was aware that there was some kind of door, that I was awaiting the opening of some kind of door of opportunity. And even that was something that the Lord confirmed as well, because at some point there was somebody who watched the channel who went really out of her way, and God bless this woman. What a hero, really, because I think that she didn't have social media. She just had YouTube or something like that. And I don't know why she didn't leave it in my YouTube comments or something. I don't really remember, but she went out of her way to just make sure that I got it. Maybe she was thinking she won't see the YouTube comment. So she reached out to her niece, and then her niece contacted me in my DMs on Instagram, and she was like, hey, my aunt watches your channel and she has a word for you. She said that she was praying the other day and the Lord told her, tell Njabu that a door has opened to her because she has not denied me. He said, tell Njabu, a door has opened to her because she has not denied my name. So that woman gave me that word, and I prayed about it, and I said, Lord, is this for me? And the Lord confirmed to me that the word is for me. So I received that confirmation from the Lord, and I knew that I was waiting for some kind of door. It was not just a spiritual door, but also a physical door. The physical door was the door to a home, okay? And that door opened first because I had not denied the Lord, but also because I had been obedient to his instruction. So because I was obedient to always try and stay in this general area that the Lord had given me, what that meant is that I was frequently booking the same Airbnb listing over and over, right? It was actually one of my favorite listings as well because it was in like the perfect neighborhood. It was a room inside of a much larger house. And so the manager of that listing was noticing that I would book the room for a few days and then I would check out, and then I come back a week later or 2 weeks later and book it for another few days. I believe that that pattern caught caught her attention and made her familiar with me. And then the Lord just moved on her at the appointed time. Because one day I was minding my business and then I got a message through the Airbnb app from this lady saying, "Hey, are you interested in consistent housing?" I never told her about my housing situation. I imagined that she just put two and two together. And so she reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you interested in consistent housing? I have another house that's just down the street from this one in the same neighborhood, but those rooms in that house are actually specifically for long-term guests and long-term bookings. And because those rooms are for long-term bookings, I charge less over there than I do in this house that you've repeatedly stayed in. Over there, I charge a flat fee that you can pay either per week or per month." So the reason that God instructed me to stay in that particular area is because he knew that a time would come when he would move on that woman to offer consistent housing to the lady that she'd seen booking her Airbnb over and over and over again. If I hadn't obeyed, I might have missed that door that God was opening in order to give me stability for the first time in a year and to finally begin to restore my life. And so I moved into that house at the end of January 2025. And by that point, I had been moving from place to place since January 1st of 2024. I hadn't had a real home for 13 months. I had moved across the country and back again. I had stayed in about 30 Airbnbs by that point, and that's not counting the many that I stayed in more than once. I'd also spent maybe 50 nights in my car over the course of nearly 4 months. And after all of that, I was finally nearing the finish line. Now, life didn't change overnight once I moved into the house. There were still challenges that I faced, and the wilderness wasn't immediately over. It took about 8 months after that before the season officially came to an end. And during those 8 months, there was still warfare and there were also still losses. For instance, I lost my car during that time. And I remember while I was losing the car, I felt so terrified because it awakened every fear that I had inside of me. And I started to panic and think, oh my gosh, maybe my life is actually going backwards and not forwards, you know? But literally less than 48 hours after I lost that car, an old client sent me a message asking me to work on her writing project, and I have never had to do food delivery since. God was restoring me to my old career. In fact, one of the reasons, if not one of the main reasons that I lost that car was actually because the Lord had been nudging me to stop doing food delivery. He'd been convicting me to stop doing food delivery, but I was too afraid because I was scared of not making that quick money that I had come to depend on and then potentially losing my housing again, right? I still had trauma from the period where I was unhoused. So even though the Lord had been nudging me, trying to get me to pivot back to my old career and give it a chance, I had been resisting because it just felt like a risk. And I just felt like I need money now. I pay rent weekly for this room. I need money coming in every single week without fail. I can't be wasting time trying to pursue editorial or writing opportunities that might pay off a month or two down the line, right? So yes, it was really me resisting the shift that the Lord wanted me to make that actually opened me up to finally losing my car, okay? And it's crazy. And I say finally losing my car because the Lord had given me multiple dreams about me losing my car even before it happened. I received at least 3 dreams over a period of months where when I tell you I saw the exact truck that ended up taking my car, it's crazy. Multiple dreams where I saw somebody trying to take my car, but I didn't even panic because in each of those dreams, like the person never succeeded. So I thought I was good. You know, I was just so, I wasn't paying enough attention to my dreams, I think, in that season as well. But yeah, I had 3 different dreams minimum where somebody was trying to take my car and that person never succeeded in the dreams. So when I would wake up, I didn't even really pray as fervently as I should have concerning the dream. You know, I was kind of being like lazy about it. And so the Lord was like, okay, you're going to continue to try to make money from this car when I'm trying to get you to make your money a different way in this season. Fine, I'm going to let this car be taken from you. And that is what happened, okay? So my car was taken, and even that story is kind of crazy, but I don't have time to get into it. The car is taken, and I remember I had to take an Uber back to, the house that I was staying in, and I just spent the day in my room fasting and just crying out to the Lord, like, oh my gosh, Lord, please, like, how could this happen, And then I literally woke up the next day to a message from an old client saying, hey, we've got work for you. And I'm happy to say that I have never done Uber Eats or DoorDash since. And it does actually make sense, that I would lose my car in the end. So I'm not really mad about it, even though I do believe that that specific loss, I don't think it was part of God's perfect will for me. I think He wanted me to actually hold on to that car, but it just didn't work out that way because of choices that I'd made, right? But when I look back on it, it doesn't upset me. It actually makes a lot of sense that I lost my car in the end, because remember when I got to Houston, the Lord told me, you will recover all, right? It was one of the very few things that He told me when I made that move. And how do you recover all when you haven't lost everything to begin with, right? My car just happened to be the final thing that I was going to lose in my process before that chapter finally came to a close. My wilderness season ended in the summer of 2025. It had been about 4 years total. At the end, when the Lord was confirming to me that it really was over, He didn't confirm it directly to me. And I'm glad that He didn't confirm it directly to me, because I think that if He had told me directly, I might have felt like I was hallucinating. I might have felt like I was imagining it, because there had been so many moments where I sincerely believed that it was over and it wasn't. So in the wisdom of the Lord, He confirmed it through a ministry that I trust. And so the fact that I got kind of that external confirmation that mirrored what I had been suspecting in my own heart and in my own spirit, that allowed me to be confident that it was actually true and that I actually was finally coming out on the other side. I actually think that I'm going to include a clip of the call that I was on. I was on a prayer and prophecy call when I got this word through my apostles' ministry. And I think I'm going to include the portion of the video where one of my apostles' ministers is speaking to me. She mispronounces my name because she doesn't know me, so it doesn't sound like my name, but I'm the one that she's speaking to. Here goes the clip from that call.
I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I heard the Lord say, worry no more. The rain is coming. Your season of waiting is over. He says, you have been stretched enough and you have been tested and refined. Job well done, daughter. Your obedience has made you well. God is healing you. God has healed you from emotional trauma and has given you a new heart. He says, you will rise with new joy, with new strength, and a new mind. And He said, this new mind, and this new mind and this new way of thinking will shape a new future for you. And then I saw candy, specifically Skittles, and then I saw a rainbow, and I heard the Lord say, God is bringing forth His sweet promises in your life in this hour. And then I also heard the scripture that says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. So He's about to show you that He is good. And that He's been working in your life, and you've passed the test, and you've been stretching, you've endured long enough, and He's ready to bring you forward. That is the word of the Lord.
So just in case the audio from that Zoom call isn't great, I will just give you a quick summary of what my apostles minister shared on the call with me. She said this word is for Njabu. Njabu, the Lord says that you have been stretched enough. Your obedience has made you well. You will rise in new joy and new strength. And I am healing you from emotional trauma. She also said that the Lord said, well done. Having that stamp of approval for me is the reason why nobody can tell me anything when it comes to my process. Somebody can come and say, oh no, God wasn't in that. No, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Like, it means nothing to me. It means nothing to me when the Lord has told me, well done. It means nothing to me when I receive that validation that I borderline didn't even think I deserved. You understand me? And so a few weeks after I received that word, I think within weeks after I received that word, my wilderness season ended. And that was, like I said, the end of summer 2025. After that, I got a lot of time to rest. That is one of the things that really kind of stamped to me that I was in a new season. I had come out of working like a dog to just barely get by, and I came into a season of like luxurious rest. That was one of the things that showed me that the old things have passed away, right? God gave me a lot of time where I was able to rest and recover. And I didn't have to worry about working for like 2.5 months. I think last year I spent not doing anything because the Lord had allowed me to have enough provision where like I didn't have to worry about affording my rent or worry about, my life expenses. I just had enough to just be like, okay, I have enough. I'm going to kick back and I'm just going to hang out for like 2.5 months. Just taking naps during the day, hanging around my apartment, watching TV, like I just, just doing nothing. And it was amazing. It was amazing after the labor that the previous years had been. And so I'm definitely somebody who's been released into a new season with new assignments. And one of those assignments is what brings me before you today. So again, I am finding myself in a place where I am starting something new and building it up from the ground up and having to trust that the Lord is going to make something shake. But you can't build a new thing without a foundation, right? And so for me, my story is that foundation. It's necessary for me to start off by telling my story in more detail than I ever have, so that those who need to know will be able to see who I am and see me in the spirit and understand that I am not somebody who woke up one day and decided to call herself to a platform or call herself to a position. I am not one who sent myself. I am one who was sent. And God was in it from start to finish, because there were so many times when I wanted to abandon the process, when I wanted to run away and even tried to. And the Lord would always be right there, making me go back because it wasn't yet finished. Now, speaking of being made to go back, one of the last things that I want to touch on in this video is the issue of consent. For the longest time, that was the issue that brought me the most, I would say, emotional turmoil. It was that issue of consent that had made me feel so torn, and that had honestly had me looking at the Lord some kind of way. You understand me? Because for the longest time, I used to say that if God had showed me everything from start to finish, if he had even showed me half of it from start to finish, I would have declined. I would have said no to the call. I would have said, no, thank you. I'm going to sit here and play it safe on the sidelines and just be a baby Christian all my life. Forget about all of this talk about radical faith, prophetic instructions. What do you mean prophetic instructions? Prophetic instructions to move here, to move there, pack up your life, interrupt your plans, to turn everything upside down. No, I don't want to do all that. Let me just be a casual Christian and chill. Let me just be a casual Christian and breathe. Because if going all in with God looks like that, then the price is too high. I felt that way for years. For years, I stood 10 toes down on the fact that if I'd known everything it would cost, if I'd known everything it would require of me, I would have said no. But even that is something that the Lord resolved and made right with me in the end. Because as I sit here before you today, when I look back on the last 4 or 5 years of my life, there is no doubt in my mind that I would do it all again. If I had to, I would do it all again. Would I want to? No, absolutely not. But if I had to, I would do it all again. And so the thing about consent is that God always knew that I would eventually get to this place where I would be so at peace with my process. He knew even when I was fighting the process that there was a future version of me who would look back on it all and not just make peace with it, not just be okay with it, but even understand it, right? He knew that there was going to come a time where I would look back not with resentment, but with complete understanding of why it had to play out the way that it did. And so even though the present me was saying no, the future me said yes. And it is that yes that the Lord took as consent and as me coming into agreement with the process. God rejected the no that the present me gave him and accepted and moved on the yes that was given to him by the me that was to come, okay? And he can do that because he stands outside of time. It is this version of me standing before you today that consented. It is this version of me that said, yes, Lord, I will do it. And that understanding and that revelation is what allows me to see that never once did the Lord misuse me. Never did he trick me. Never did he manipulate me. Never in my process did the Lord ever do me wrong. Instead, he saw me in my glorified form. He saw the glorified version of me, the spiritually mature version of me, the version of me that had finally grown up, and he made the choices that he made on the basis of who I would become and not just based on who I was at the time. Even in the lowest moments of your wilderness season, God sees you in your glorified form. He sees the person that you'll be after the storm, when you've come out bitter, when you've come out tougher and refined by fire, ready to do all kinds of good works. That is the version of you that he is able to see. But that readiness has a price. The wilderness season doesn't get so tough because God doesn't care if you finish. It gets hard because the price is the price. You are sowing into a future glory, and it costs what it costs. You have to give something in order to get something. That is spiritual law. It's the reason why Jesus didn't just snap his fingers and give us salvation. He came down and then laid down his own life first. First, he gave that we may receive, right? He endured a lot of suffering, a lot of pain in order to give his life in exchange for ours. And because that particular debt has been paid, that means that salvation itself is free and that the love of God is abundant. But everything else in this life is going to cost you. That is the nature of spiritual exchange. The anointing will cost you. The breakthrough will cost you. The revelation will cost you. The leadership position will cost you. For those who would walk out their full potential in Christ, something is required. There are lessons that we must learn. There are idols we need deliverance from. There are flaws that we have to acknowledge. There are things that we need to pick up, and there are things that we need to put down. All of these things are seeds that we sow into a future that we don't yet see. In our wilderness season, we sow in sacrifice. Some of us sow in ministry. Some sow in patience when they don't understand. We sow in helping people when we feel like we can barely even help ourselves. We sow in giving to the poor even when we are poor ourselves, because we trust that the Lord is the one who will repay. We sow in tears. We sow in surrender. And some of us even sow in miles upon miles as we go from one heartbreaking city to another. It might not feel like it at the time, but all of these things count for something in the end. And we can be sure that God is keeping score, because the Bible says that nothing we do for his kingdom is wasted, and that we will surely reap a harvest in due season if we don't give up. So that is it for me and my wilderness season testimony. I shared, I think, only the things that needed to be included, because if I shared everything, it would have been 15 episodes long. But I trust that things that I shared are the things that needed to be shared in order to help and to minister to people who are going through this process and will be going through this process in the days and the years to come. I thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. So until the next time I see you, I say God bless you and keep the faith. This is the reality. This is the reality of what following God looks like. Car full to the brim. Full to the brim, even here. Full to the brim. Full to the brim with stuff for months on end. Trunk full of stuff. Trunk full. And this is just how you live.